Welcome back to Merit Election Watch 2025. Hope you had a fantastic weekend. We are back here on Monday evening. I want to bring you the latest of what's been happening in the road to election coming up on April 28th. This year, 2025, we are in the middle of an election campaign. Right now, basically, it's a two-horse race between the Conservatives and the Liberals. You have other parties obviously involved there as well, but they're not looking like they're going to be forming government. So I want to bring you up a couple of updates with what's been happening. Well, there's a couple polls that have shown that the Conservatives over the weekend have been narrowing the gap in terms of what the polls. Now, I've never been a massive advocate of just individual polls. I like the aggregate amount of polls you can look at kind of what's going on, but there's always within the margin of error. And there's always different interesting things that we have to take into consideration when looking at the polls. The final poll we'll be looking at will be what's happening actually on April 20th and how are people voting. But that's an interesting little bit of a surge that's been happening with the Conservatives. We're going to see if the Liberals are going to trail off. But there's a massive event that's happening this week. It will be the leadership debates, which are happening on Wednesday and Thursday. Wednesday is the French debate. Thursday is going to be the English debate. This is definitely going to have a massive impact on public opinion of both parties. How are these leaders going to fare against each other, talking about the issues that Canada is facing? So make sure you are staying in tune with what's going on there. A couple other interesting things that's been happening as well. The Liberal Party is proposing initiatives such as eliminating GST on new homes under $1 million. Again, we are still waiting for the actual full policy platform from the Liberals. They have not released it yet. This is getting down to the wire to find out, is this the same Liberal Party that's been around for the last 10 years with a new face, or are they actually changing the direction from what they have been to a new direction? We'll see. And also, can you take them at their word if they do bring a new platform? We're going to find out about that. We've also conversely got Conservatives. They're pledging to reduce the lowest income tax brackets from 15% to about 12.75%. I mentioned about debate week as well. Interesting that Mark Carney is still talking about the policy around energy and the controversy, talking about we will be an energy leader, but yet he is doubling down on this idea of no new pipelines. So yet to figure out how is the actual plan going to go forth if we want to move forward in those areas. Couple other interesting things is Mark Carney's been under criticism today regarding where does he pay taxes. Yeah, it seems there's been 3 interviews where he's had himself or his party campaign leadership has stated to different journalists that he is a tax-paying resident of Canada since a certain time period, but it's not really a clear answer on do you pay taxes in Canada or not. Seems like it should be a simple yes or no question. But one thing I want to bring forth to you, because this was concerning, and this is also has to do with, as Canadians, what type of government do we want governing our country? And Mark Carney has been talking a lot about the idea of misinformation and disinformation and big social media platforms that are based out of the US that are promoting misogyny, hate, promoting these different things that he quotes and says will affect our children. Then he goes on to say our government is going to act. Well, this seems like it's a doubling down on Bill C-63, which actually did not continue debate after former Prime Minister Justin Trudeau prorogued government in just before in the end of 2024. And it seems like he is wanting to pick this back up to quote unquote protect Canadian citizens. The interesting thing about this is you and I are going to have to decide, who do we want to be the arbiters of truth in our country? Is that something that you want the government to disseminate what is allowed into our country through social media, through online, through internet, versus what is not, because they deem what is acceptable and not? You know, a lot of this is a very massive issue, because it comes down to this idea: do you want more government managing your life, managerialism, or do you want government to create just an atmosphere, an area of where citizens and free enterprise can go forth? Because this can be a very slippery slope, and where you personally fall and where you actually are going to fall in this issue is going to determine whether you end up voting Conservative, whether you end up voting Liberal, because they've got very different stances on this type of thing. So lots of things to be looking forward to as we continue on, but we're going to be joined by a great friend in just a moment to hear her opinions on many of these topics as we go forward. But stick with us. We'll be back after the break. Hey, well, welcome back, and thanks for joining me, Rupa. We just want to connect as we move towards April 28th. Election Day countdown is continuing on. We just elapsed over the weekend. Would just love to hear your thoughts. Anything that stood out to you that happened over the weekend in either campaign? What have you been noticing?
Well, the big news over the weekend was Buttongate,
Yeah.
where there were these buttons that were found at the Canada Strong and Free conference, which I attended, by the way,
Okay.
last week. And I didn't see these buttons, but then that doesn't mean anything. And they're it's quite shocking, actually, that the Liberal Party, which claims to fight disinformation and misinformation, a couple of its staffers were overheard at a pub in Ottawa, claiming that they planted these buttons to discredit the Conservative Party as MAGA, and so it's quite, and a reporter who was within earshot of this conversation reported on it for the CBC. So it's quite extraordinary that they would stoop to this level. But remember, bear in mind that during the Freedom Convoy, there were these so-called sightings of the Confederate and swastika flags, which nobody on the ground actually saw, and the media would keep circulating the same stock of photos of this one guy holding the flag, and nobody actually found this guy, and so no one knows what happened in the end. So it reminded me of a bit like what happened during the Freedom Convoy, where we were expected to believe that there were all of these racists out there, but in fact nobody actually found them.
Yeah, and I can personally attest to the convoy site because I know you were covering the convoy extensively. I was down there for 2.5 weeks as well on the ground, and I actually, my friend and I, we made it our personal mission to try to find that. We couldn't find anything on it. So this is interesting because I've been seeing all the news come up from yesterday and today on the Button Gate, but it kind of feels like it's a little bit of a he said, she said at the end of the day. But the interesting thing you just said was the Liberals have made it a mandate to fight misinformation and disinformation. Mark Carney has said very recently, one of his campaigns, just the fact that they want to fight this through big platforms that seem to stem out of the state, that bring up misogyny, hatred, and his government's going to act. And this seems like it's actually a bit of a doubling down on Bill C-63, the idea of the government controlling what information is coming into our country. Love to hear your thoughts on that.
Yeah, it's absolutely distressing, but I'm not at all surprised because Carney, at the end of the day, shares a lot of Trudeau's core beliefs. Also, going back to the Freedom Convoy, back in 2022, in February 2022, Carney wrote an op-ed for the Globe and Mail calling the protesters seditionists, which is quite an extraordinary thing to say about people who are standing up for their rights, their right to protest, and it was an act of civil disobedience. They were not here to overthrow the government. So we know where he's coming from, and all of this thing about fighting these claims about fighting disinformation or misinformation, it's really a smokescreen for suppressing dissent and narrowing what would be considered as acceptable debate. C-63 died on the order paper after Trudeau prorogued Parliament. But so if the Liberals win, I think there's a good chance they might try to introduce it. But I just also want to say that what's distressing about this climate that we're in is that south of the border, things are not exactly going swimmingly well for the right to dissent. We've seen some extraordinary extraordinary attacks on the right to dissent in the United States, sadly, unfortunately. Until recently, we could say Canada needs to hold itself to a higher standard. Look at the U.S., which is a beacon of individual liberty and freedom and so on and so forth. So what's happening in the United States also gives comfort to politicians here and everywhere, actually, across the world, that they have the green light to do the same thing to their political opponents.
Well, this is, I think, a symptom of a larger problem. This is a huge issue in terms of what kind of government do we want to have, and who do we want to appoint to be the arbiters of truth? who's come out? Do we want that to be for ourselves and as individual families we control and teach and learn, or do we want to give that role to the government that you're the one we trust to be the arbiter of truth? And that's really going to be a big voting issue, I believe, for whatever party you end up voting for, because you're going to look at their different policy in that sense. But great take. Appreciate your thoughts on that. Notice that it seems there's some polls that have been coming out over the weekend where conservatives seem to be narrowing the gap. In some of them, they almost seem neck and neck now. Thoughts on that? Why the turnaround?
So I think this is just based on one poll. That's where I see some kind of tightening. But again, it's within the margin of error. So I think it was just 2 percentage points, maybe not even that. I think any improvement is good for the Conservatives, but they're still not out of the woods. The Liberals currently hold the lead in most of the polls. The race does remain quite competitive. And listen, there's still 2 weeks to go, and public opinion could still change in the days leading up to the polls. But unfortunately, given our system, given the first past the post system, the Conservatives need to have a bigger share of the vote than the Liberals if they hope to form government. So this 2 percentage point difference within the margin of error just will not do. Bear in mind that they won the last 2 elections. They won the popular vote, but they lost the election. So if they even pull even with the Liberals, they're likely to lose the election even if they win the popular vote. That's if the polls are accurate. And my own take on the polls is that, I take them with a grain of salt. They're not a crystal ball, and they're prone to errors. So the ultimate poll, the only poll that counts, is on April 28th.
Yeah, it's going to be really interesting, especially with the leadership debates coming up this week, French on Wednesday and English on Thursday. That can have a big impact as there seems to be some, I'll say, criticism of Carney the more he speaks. It seems that he's rubbed people the wrong way, maybe. Pierre obviously has got a great ground movement going on with the momentum that they've had. So I want to move to Pierre a little bit because there's been both criticism and depending on the angle or point of view people have, his similarities to the whole MAGA movement in the United States. Liberals, maybe they've been using this as a strategy to paint Pierre as the same as a Trumper, and it's not going to turn out good for Canada. I'd love to hear your thoughts on that because you're definitely seeing the comparison. But first off, is that a strategy? Are they even comparable? And is that a good thing, a bad thing? What are your thoughts generally on that?
Honestly, I think I laugh when people say Pierre Poilievre is a lot like Trump. He's nothing like Trump. He's boringly centrist. If anything, I'd like him to be a little more specific on certain things. And I've criticized the campaign and Pierre Poilievre for not being specific about, what's he going to do about DEI funding when it comes to federal money. What does he mean when he says that he stands against cancel culture? What is he going to stand up for people's right to dissent? He makes a lot of vague promises, but I'm not quite sure where he actually stands. What actually he's going to do if he were to become prime minister. So I feel like the endorsement from MAGA, like Elon Musk and Joe Rogan, I think it's mostly a distraction. Voters in the end are going to make up their own mind on who to vote, and a foreign endorsement probably won't make much of a difference. I mean, I don't think it makes any difference at all, but it certainly gives the Liberal strategy some talking points. They can say, aha, look, there you go. He's a lot like Trump. That's why they like him. And so that'll be their spin. But I don't think, in the end, apart from very little rhetorical similarity, there's very little in common that Poilievre has with Trump or MAGA. As I said, he's boringly centrist for my taste.
Yeah. Well, and we talked about that last week, just about this troubling of distinguishing himself from conservative liberal on some of the issues. And that's going to be, I do think it's a distraction technique as well, and a strategy, but for some people, it seems to be working because I've come across a lot of people who say, well, he's a Trumper. He's not going to do good for our country. And how is he going to handle the situations that we need to handle? So be interesting. Hey, just in our final closing moments, I want to hear your take on this. And this is recently Doug Ford What is going on with our friend Mr. Ford and his back and forth, especially as a conservative premier in Ontario? And it seems to be his undermining comments of the Conservative Party federally. Just any takes, any thoughts? It's just interesting to see that develop.
Just what everybody else is saying. I don't have any deep insight into this, but I have been hearing for the last couple of months through my various sources close to the Conservative Party that he's positioning himself to be the leader of the Conservative Party if Pierre Poilievre were to lose, if the Conservatives were to lose this election, and so the undermining. I actually found it extraordinary when his campaign manager Corey Tenecki called it campaign malpractice. That sounds pretty strong, and it almost suggests that that it's some kind of a crime. It evokes these strong emotions in you when you hear that term. And I was wondering about this over the weekend. Why would you describe it in those terms? Yeah, normally you just say, well, I think they screwed up the campaign, by losing a 20-point lead, and that's how I would have described it. But campaign malpractice seems quite extraordinary, quite extreme, and who knows? I don't know what Mr. Ford's plans are in the end, but it doesn't seem like he's fully on board with the federal Conservative Party in this election.
No, he's to be honest, he's been quite entertaining to me, especially through the tariff talk and kind of his off the cuff comments. Sometimes the way he's responded has been like, okay, it's interesting to see as kind of a bit of a wild card within our system. But one last real quick question for you. Is Mark Carney, is he still on his temporary leave from his campaign? Do you know if he's got back to it today? Because I know he left for a couple of days to resume duties as prime minister.
Yeah, I think he was somewhere in Ottawa yesterday, maybe in his constituency, which he's, he doesn't even live in that constituency. I know he lives in Rockcliffe, so I think he's back on the campaign, and hopefully there are no more pauses between now and April 28th. You may have just seen my cat jump into the frame, but
all good. We'll welcome her as a guest too.
Yeah. Carney is making this a ballot question about Trump, right? And for him, it's not about the Trudeau era liberal failures. So, if Canadians walk into the voting booth thinking that the biggest threat to their wallets is sitting in the White House, not in Ottawa, that actually works in his favor.
Exactly.
Great take. If he's going to pause the campaign to deal with Trump, it plays well for his campaign.
Yeah, lots of interesting things evolving as we keep going. Always appreciate your thoughts and your comments, Rupa. We'll be back with you, I know, later this week. But thanks for sticking with us, you guys, and we'll see you after the break. Well, welcome back to Merit TV Canada's Election Watch. Lots to think about, lots to go through. Really, it does take us time as citizens. If we are to be acting as citizens in this country, it does take time and effort to understand what are the major issues. What is each party? Where do they stand on each issue? What's the leader of the party that we're voting for? Where do they stand? What are they promising? Do they have a track record of keeping up with their promises? What kind of Canada do you want to see? What kind of Canada do you want your children and your grandchildren to grow up with? Because these elections that we do, the times that we as citizens can speak and that proverbially speak and we can vote and we can use our voice, these have massive impact, not just on the next 2 years or next 4 years, but on decades. Is that a lot of times we have to weigh what is the opportunity cost if we have a period of time where we're not progressing or we've actually regressed, we've actually gone backwards. What have we missed out on in potential growth? And all of these things have to be weighed by you and I. And looking at these type of things, I thought Rupa had some really great insights that I'm going to challenge you to think about, to look into it for yourself so that you can be educated in how you should be voting, so you can know how to have conversations with people around the proverbial dinner table of our country, that we can have proper conversations. Because you look at things that liberals are in the lead or the conservatives are narrowing the gap, or you look at where they stand on issues like potentially of the retabling of something like Bill C-63 or Bill C-69, the No New Pipelines bill, which has to do with help getting our energy not just out of our country, but actually across our country from west to east. All of these things are big issues. Who do we want to determine what comes into our country in terms of information or in terms of opinions, or who do we trust to be the arbiter of truth? I want to be the one that judges for myself what is true, what is not true. I don't want to allow someone else to determine what's coming into our country. That's something me as a citizen, I need to be informed about all the different opinions so I can make a judgment about where we're going. But it's interesting to see the different strategies that are going on, the issues that are happening in Canada. In this last minute, I didn't mean to go this direction, but I want you to really understand the importance of what it means to be a citizen in Canada, the duty that we have. The duty that when you are a citizen of Canada, to understand that the things that are at stake when it comes to our lives, our loved ones' lives, our children's future, where we stand in this country, our ability to trade, our ability to live in peace with each other, to prosper and to create wealth, where we can create great programming for school and education, and being able to have amazing healthcare systems that actually grows and treats its patients, not falls back when we've got immigration or population issues in our country. How do we create wealth is something that's going to be very important as well. All of these issues I'm going to urge you to look into, find out what you believe, and go vote accordingly on April 28th. Thanks for sticking with us on Merit TV Canada Election Watch. We'll see you guys tomorrow.